Sounds like whatever we do, we're playing God.
We are gods.
I think that conversation is going to prove to be very important as we move into the final 2 episodes of this season, and this episode was incredible. And I do think we have an unlikely traitor in our group of heroes that are trying to save everything, who actually caused all of the events at the end of this episode. So be sure to watch this whole video, and I'm going to dig into that here shortly. Let's recap the events of episode 4, and then I'll jump into my favorite theories for where I think things are headed. The episode opens in the heart of the TVA and Miss Minutes telling Renslayer he wasn't always alone, and shows her as sort of hologram-like replay of He Who Remains and a younger Renslayer establishing the TVA. Renslayer leaves and we see Kang ordering Miss Minutes to erase all their memories, which would explain why people like Mobius and everyone else have no recollection of anything before the TVA. Miss Minutes then tells Renslayer that she didn't just help, she commanded the army. Ravonna asks Miss Minutes what she's proposing, to which she replies, "We don't need him. Maybe we never did." Next, we see Victor Timely entering the TVA, and he's soon met by Mobius, Loki, Sylvie, and Hunter B-15 as they tell him the loom is failing and he's the only one who can fix it. Victor's introduced to OB, and they realize their work is each based off of one another, and OB then shares a plan to save the loom by sending someone to the gangway with their throughput multiplier and launching it into the loom. The problem, OB explains, is that the gangway room is incredibly high in radiation, much higher than it was the first time when Mobius went in. Victor interrupts and says he had a similar problem with his loom until he made this device. OB and Victor then get to work as the others head off. Mobius recommends they get pie as they wait, and this is the 3rd reference to pie this season, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Drop your pie theories down in the comments. And Sylvie unloads on him for not caring about his own life on the timeline and all the others that are disappearing. Next, we see General Dox and her soldiers that were attempting to prune all timelines, including Brad, who argues with Dox about whether or not they've earned a life after all their work with the TVA. B-15 enters and says she knows Dox cares about the TVA and asks for her and her men's help, but both are unsure of whether or not they can actually trust one another. Next, Sylvie and Loki discuss Sylvie's inability to kill Timely because he was too scared and she couldn't do it, as opposed to He Who Remains. Then they discuss burning everything to the ground and trying to build it back, which is easy for people like them. They kind of come to an agreement to hope in the plan that Victor is able to help save everything. And this is where we get the quote that opened up this video when Loki says that they have to do better than He Who Remains, and Sylvie says, "Whatever we do, we're playing God." And Loki says, "We are gods." And as I alluded to earlier, I believe their godly powers and their magic, which they can now use thanks to the dampeners being removed from the TVA, are going to be hugely, critically important as we move in to these next episodes, and we'll talk more about that in the theories section. We're then back in the holding cell with Dox and her crew, and Renslayer and Miss Minutes enter through a time door. She offers them all a life on the timeline if they'll follow her through the door and help restore order to the TVA. When there's hesitancy, Miss Minutes powers up the torture device in the room, and Dox says she's seeing the bigger picture for the first time. Dox and Renslayer then both work to persuade X5 to their side of the argument when the machine traps everyone but Brad in a shrinking cube. And then they're all killed in the most brutal mass slaughter ever seen in any MCU anything. And Miss Minutes looks on with a look of pure, twisted enjoyment just before the 3 of them exit through the time door. B-15 later discovers the carnage in the holding cell and attempts to use her temp pad, but learns that Miss Minutes has denied her access. We're then back with Victor, OB, and Casey when Mobius enters with hot cocoa, which seems to sidetrack Victor as he shows extreme interest in this machine and is taken there by D90. Victor offers a new and improved hot cocoa to D90 just before he's pruned by Brad, who then asks Victor for the device. We cut back to the basement where OB is also now locked out of his computer by Miss Minutes. Next, we follow Loki and Sylvie entering an elevator, but they get separated, and this appears to be the same situation we saw in episode 1 when Sylvie saw Loki looking through the elevator door. This is confirmed when Loki rounds the corner and sees the future version of himself trying to fix his time-slipping problem. He follows and prunes himself just like we saw in episode 1, and he tells Sylvie that it will soon all make sense. Loki then answers the ringing phone to find OB on the other end. OB and Mobius are discussing rebooting the system to take Miss Minutes offline, and while doing so, Casey takes the throughput multiplier during the argument and heads toward the gangway unnoticed. More on this in a bit. OB says the biggest risk to taking down the system is that the dampeners that prevent magic in the TVA will also go offline, which excite Loki and Sylvie, and they quickly agree that the system should be taken down. Back in the room with Renslayer, Miss Minutes notices something is wrong as she's taken offline, but just before she goes, she tells Victor, "You'll never be him." Also a very important line to happen at this specific moment. Again, we're about to get to it. As the system is taken offline, Brad goes to check it out and runs into Loki and Sylvie, who work some literal mind control magic with Brad, and they head back to get Victor, and Brad prunes Renslayer before being released from Sylvie's control. They take Victor back to the control room and finally use him to unlock the system. Victor insists that he be the one to go in and launch the multiplier. He steps out onto the gangway and is instantly turned into spaghetti, as we learned it was called earlier in the season. OB says the temporal radiation must have just been too high, but I'm thinking something else was going on. The group then watches as the loom explodes and the episode ends. So there was clearly a lot that happened in this episode that you could pick apart and theorize off of, and you might think it's weird that I'm gonna pick this first one, but ever since I noticed it when I watched the episode, I can't get it off my mind. Why did Casey wait until OB was distracted to grab the throughput multiplier and take it down to the gangway? If this wasn't a big deal, I don't think we would have had the shots that clearly showed him taking it while OB and Mobius were distracted, and then followed him as he rounded the room, and then it hung on him for several seconds as he descended down towards the gangway. Now, my goofy brain is all over the place with this one, running in several directions as to why this was so important to capture and to present to the viewer. But my favorite yet most twisted route is that Casey is actually sabotaging everything. Perhaps he did something down there that caused Victor to die and ultimately result in the loom exploding. But why would he do this? After reflecting on the episode, I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw the scene with him taking the multiplier, immediately followed by Miss Minutes telling Victor,
"Victor, I need to tell you, I need to tell you. You'll never be him."
These showrunners have very cleverly placed things in front of us in past seasons and past episodes for a very specific reason, and I feel like that's the case here. Maybe there's more to this character that we don't know about yet, but we will soon find out. You'll have to let me know what you think of this one because I'm honestly just not sure. But I am sure I really enjoy making these videos, so if stuff like this is your thing, be sure to subscribe. Now, our characters clearly aren't dead. Loki Season 2 trailers have already revealed footage of the final 2 episodes, including shots of Casey emerging from the wreckage of the TVA, and a shot of Sylvie apparently being surrounded by strands of timeline. There's also a shot of Loki time-slipping to a jet ski dealership, which I'm very excited about, and one of Hunter B-15 dressed as a doctor, which all come after episode 4, suggesting there is still some hope for these characters and for our story. One of the biggest things to remember is that with the system offline, Loki and Sylvie have the ability to use their powers. I don't think that this episode is the only time we're going to see a past or future Loki seeing one another. In fact, I believe there are going to be several more instances where that happens. Based on the trailers, it looks like we're about to watch Loki playing this like a video game and simply restarting from their last checkpoint and trying things time and time again until they get things right. And during my editing, I was thinking through this again, and I think this is actually why the lights keep flickering all throughout the show. I think every time Loki time skips or travels back in time to try again, that's what's causing all of the light flickering throughout the season. So what are the implications of the loom exploding? First of all, we're setting up things like Avengers, the Kang Dynasty coming in 2026, but sooner than that is Deadpool 3, and the events from this episode seem to be exactly why and how Deadpool ends up in the MCU along with Wolverine. Overall, this episode reignited a flame in all of us, and I think I speak for everyone when I say, I'm looking forward to next week. See you then.